So the battle over Ukraine's Pokrovsk is reaching a point of critical mass. A pre-war city of 60,000 residents, it lies now almost entirely in ruins. A ghost city, and one that embodies the devastation of Putin's war. But more crucially, it also embodies a Pyrrhic victory for what is, supposedly, Russia's war machine. For months, Russian forces clawing their way towards this Ukrainian settlement, a shattered industrial hub in western Donetsk, a gateway to the entire oblast. What began as a sudden offensive on the area has turned into a stalemate, a brutal grinding siege, and one that exposes just how desperate Vladimir Putin has become for a victory of any sort he can sell back home. And while much attention or media focus is on the military dimension, on the operations, its symbolism and the real reason Putin is so desperate to take Pokrovsk is being ignored. So in this video, I wanted to explore the bigger picture behind Putin's fixation, why he cannot ever admit how it shapes his power or even potential legacy, and what it reveals about the wider trajectory of Russia and the limits of its warfare in ways you wouldn't have considered. This is The Global Gambit. How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to The Global Gambit, where we go beneath the headlines to uncover the strategy, the psychology, and stakes behind the world's biggest geopolitical shifts. In this instance, though I am not purely a military analyst, what I aim to do here is utilize the fact I am half Russian, my origins, and I have studied Russia for many years academically to explain why Putin is so obsessed on taking a city of 60,000 with a force basically double that size. Indeed, it reveals a systemic outdatedness in the mindset of Russia's military approach, conflating tactical gain with strategic reach. But more on that later, so keep watching throughout the video. And before going further, what do you think about this? I want to hear your takes of what drives Putin's obsession with this city. Strategy, symbolism, or sheer desperation. Drop your thoughts in the comments below and consider subscribing if what you hear in this video resonates, as we try to cut through what is increasingly an area of AI slop and information propaganda. Now, Pokrovsk is at the center of what has been Russia's military operations for a long time now. Not just militarily though, but politically, because what happens here defines the next stage of the war, and more importantly, Putin's potential survival. Before getting into that though, let's start with some hard facts. Also known by its Soviet-era name Krasnoyarsk, Pokrovsk lies roughly 10 kilometers from Ukraine's only coking coal mine, and has long been described as the gateway to the entire of Donetsk Oblast, something that is symbolic at this point, the heart of Putin's goals in his special military operation, or what we call, as anyone normal, his war. It helps to explain why Moscow continues to frame it as a symbolic target, But before getting into that, let's start with some hard facts. Also known by its Soviet-era name Krasnoyarsk, Pokrovsk lies roughly 10 kilometers from Ukraine's only coal mine, and has long been described as the gateway to Donetsk, the entire oblast, and the thing that Putin has put so much emphasis on in his special military operation. Details that help explain why Moscow continues to frame it as the symbolic target despite its limited practical value now. Indeed, according to much footage compiled, Russian assault units have been entering Pokrovsk in recent days from multiple directions, having been trying to lay siege to the city for months. In the north, they've seized the high-rise districts overlooking the only road connecting Ukrainian troops to nearby other strongholds and the rest of the country. A corridor just 5 kilometers wide still separates these advancing Russian units from those already supposedly inside the city, but a corridor that is rapidly closing. And for Ukraine, in many ways, some people argue this is a lifeline. Lose it and you lose critical major garrisons in the area, or areas along what's known as the fortress city, and it risks being encircled. But so far, Kiev has demonstrated its ability to do a lot with not very much. It doesn't back down, and Ukrainian commanders reject any talk of withdrawal. Instead, they promise to stabilize the situation, counterattack, and even eventually clear Pokrovsk entirely. But other open source videos counter this, claiming that small groups of Ukrainian infantry engage in street fighting. Some even surrender, others conducting daring raids into the city centre. President Volodymyr Zelensky insisting that there are 200 to 300 Russian troops inside Pokrovsk, when analysts of independent backgrounds emphasize that it is likely 10 times higher. Point is that there is so much activity and focus on a city when this is about an entire country's independence and sovereignty. So with that in mind, why does Putin want Pokrovsk so badly? Why does he need it? Historically, Pokrovsk would have made sense. It was once a railway junction, a mining and coking hub tied to Ukraine's steel industry. But today there's not much of that left. No functioning mines, usable trains, and no industry to seize. And that's before even going into the fact that the city's been turned to rubble. You gain nothing from it. It's a big deal because Russian media or propagandism says it's a big deal. And in that lies a tragedy. Russia is losing up to 8 soldiers per square metre of captured territory here. The population, once 60,000, is now down to perhaps a tenth of that, many sheltering in basements of this city. And yet the Kremlin insists that it matters, because it has to. That's the deeper point here. Putin can't claim Kiev, can't claim Kharkiv, then he needs something, anything, to parade as proof that Russia is winning. Pokrovsk has become that symbol, a microcosm of this much larger delusion that is Putin's mind. For the Russian public, it's a victory. For the military, it's a, Pyrrhic one. You'll use 3 times as many troops by taking 1.5 times the losses of Ukraine, just to seize what is now a ghost town. And so what does this say about the state of the Russian army? A little bit on that in a moment. You see, for Ukraine, the question isn't whether Pokrovsk matters, it's about the level of worth in its bigger strategy. Indeed, its strategy has always been about asymmetry, trading space for time, and time for the overall Russian exhaustion. Russia still fights like it's 1943, assuming sheer manpower will overwhelm its enemies, and indeed, that is an important component. Ukraine does not have the manpower that Russia can call upon. But modern warfare doesn't work like that anymore. Drones, artillery, long-form strikes, cybernetics, all of these mean that mass alone no longer wins wars. It's why Russia's obsession with towns like Pokrovsk reveals an outdated mindset, one rooted in 20th century thinking that confuses territorial grabs with strategic progress. The fixation on symbolic victories over substance that leads to the systemic absolute losses for Russia, a country we all assumed would sweep Ukraine in a week, and yet how it doesn't even have the capacity to hold ultimate fronts that it did in yesteryear. And ultimately, its back end, the backyards of its supply chains, ever more at risk from Ukraine strikes, and the Russian military unable to do anything. That's why Ukraine can afford to arguably cede this bit of territory when necessary. Its goal is to bankrupt Russia's ability to fight, destroy these oil depots, supply chains, industrial production achieves more than holding another block of ruins in Donetsk. And ultimately, that leads to frustration within the Russian Kremlin, within the government, the regime, and you get infighting, as we see increasingly between the FSB and the MOD. In Pokrovsk, therefore, Russia has the wrong strategy for the wrong century. Now, if you're finding this breakdown useful, do give the video a like and consider subscribing as I continue to break down these developments in real time and trying to provide a mix of Western but also Russian perspectives of how the things work, as well as covering forgotten conflicts like those in Sudan. But with that, back to the current desperation of Putin, because by some Ukrainian estimates, more than 120,000 Russian troops are in the city or surrounding it, meaning daily losses of over 800 men. And yet after all that, what does Russia actually gain? The terrain beyond Pokrovsk is flat, it's open, and almost impossible to defend. Capturing it doesn't open a clear road to Dnipro or Kiev. It just exposes Russia's lines to a counterattack. So this isn't a victory, it's a self-inflicted wound dressed up as a triumph. The short-termism of the Kremlin and its military leaders, of Gerasimov and their inability to make effective strategical decisions. Even if the Kremlin takes Pokrovsk, it inherits rubble, not a base. And beyond that, miles of exposed farmland, a logistical nightmare for an already overstretched army. So Putin isn't winning ground, he's spending lies for optics. 4 years effectively into this invasion, and he's desperate for some kind of, sell. And when symbolism replaces strategy, then you've already lost. Russia may be losing as many as 8 soldiers for every square meter gained, a figure that captures the madness of this campaign and sets up the grim reality of what's at stake next. And sure, while taking Pokrovsk could be the most significant gain since, say, Avdiivka many months ago, it's far from decisive, and much of Donetsk, 65% of it, is still under Ukraine's control. And think about that. That's Avdiivka and Pokrovsk. We're not talking swathes of oblasts. These are 2 minor cities within the oblast which Russia can't even take. It puts into perspective the sheer lack of progress they've actually made, regardless of what the propagandists and bullshitters on the rest of other parts of YouTube will claim. So yes, Pokrovsk is a battle that rages on. It's brutal, it's costly, and remains uncertain. Likely to fall perhaps, but whether the city stands or falls, it's already shown something fundamental. Russia's victories are becoming indistinguishable from its defeats. For Ukraine, Pokrovsk is time. It is actually options. For Russia, though, it is critical. It's theatre more than anything. You're using nearly 3 times as many soldiers to take a town of 60,000. That's not conquest, that's collapse by another name. And if Putin takes it, he wins nothing but another graveyard for the soldiers that are going to die on behalf of his war crimes and delusion in terms of glorifying the former Soviet or Russian Empire. And if he fails, he loses what credibility remains and what time he has as the country's despot. My name is Pyotr Kurzin. I'm a mix of English and Russian, and I do run the Global Gambit here, where I make sense of global politics straightforwardly, without spin, and cutting through the noise, picking up on the details that may get lost. And if you want to support the channel, then do consider subscribing, giving the video a like. It's all free. And if you want to go further, then consider joining as a member or supporting me on Patreon, and you can find some of my writings, which I will be doing increasingly now from this period, on Substack. But with that, we'll see you all in the next one. Take care.